And welcome to the audit panel. First of all, item 1 on the agenda, we have apologies for absence from Assembly Member Prince and Assembly Member Gavron. Item 2, Declaration of Interests. Can we note the Declaration of Interests, please? Noted? Yeah. And I should take items 3 and 4 and 5 together. As you can probably note, the membership of the committee here has changed. If we can note that, please. I remain here. No one actually even asked me if I wanted to.
They're very confident.
I don't mind, I like it. But actually, no one actually did say, do you want to stay?
It could be a short meeting.
Keith Prince. And we have 2 new members. I'd like to actually formally welcome Dr. Onkar Sahota, Assembly Member Sahota, and also Assembly Member Gavron. So they're the 2 new members. But actually we are quorum. We require 2 members. There's the 2 of us here. But the other 2 can't make it there. But can we note actually that and also the terms of reference under which we are operating. Great. Item 6, we have the work programme for the audit panel. If members say that means you or me on cover any issues concerning this?
No, I don't.
Noted there. And but there's been a change in the accounts cycle. So if I could ask Carl Havers to give us an update on that, Carl. Thank you, as our outside auditor.
Yes. So the new deadline brought forward to 31st of July should be eminently achievable.
Right.
I have to go from here to the audit committee meetings of LLDC and B20, so those audits are very nearly finished. I don't think I have any matters that we need to report right now. I think there might be a couple of disclosures that might be interesting that this panel might want to look at. One is over the social housing percentages in social housing density in various different plots of land, because there's a high degree of uncertainty as to what percentages will be applied to which pieces of land. So I think that that's just an uncertainty, and I'm sure there'll be appropriate disclosure on that. There's also clearly been some progress on E20 and ownership of E20, but the recontracting or rearrangement restructuring is still very much in progress, so still very much dependent on funding from the GLA.
I see.
So they're probably the 2 highlights, if that's the right word, right. To share now. The rest of the work is progressing well, and we should be finished by the end of the month.
Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you, Carl, for that. If we don't have any more questions on the work panel coming up, we can note that then. Thank you very much, Carl, for that. I'd like to note the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 20th of March. Really, that long ago. Wow. And item 8, we have summary list of actions. Can we note those? Thank you, Carl. Thanks. We now come to basically the substantive part of the panel today, which is to review the internal audit reports. And so we have those in front of us. I wanted, David, could you sort of start off by introducing the first item, which is a review of Lumiere London governance arrangements. We have also shown our mates with us, so thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you can see, this is a review of the Lumiere London governance arrangements that we undertook earlier in the year. This was looking at the 2 festivals held in 2016 and 2018. We identified 2 recommendations, which I'm sure Shona will respond to, and this received an adequate opinion from us. I think overall, just as a general point really to make, that the festivals were very successful and a showcase for London. But as I say, we did identify some sort of 2 process recommendations you'll see at the rear of the report, but I'll allow Shona to respond to that.
Can you explain though the areas before she does respond? Actually, can you explain why it was just inadequate and not a substantial
We get into the realms of how we arrive at an audit opinion. I think it's that because of the sums involved in the festival, we identified, as I say, these two areas for that we've recommended with the management response, and from that we determined that we from our opinion perspective we see it as an adequate. What we'd expect is when we come to do the follow-up that those would have been implemented. And then we'll be looking at the substantial with the follow-up, which you'll see later on with some of our other follow-ups where we managed to achieve that.
What is your response been to that? I mean, in terms of is it we're moving those actions on?
Absolutely, thank you, Chairman. So the two actions, the first related to the fact that we haven't been required to produce a performance dashboard a performance dashboard for this particular project. Absolutely, going forward we would implement that and accept that recommendation. Actually, since then we've also met with Tim and the governance team and looked across culture projects to make sure that we have dashboards in place across everything that's required of us, so that step has already been taken. We're also one of the 5 corporate areas which are monitored, so we're also reporting through that process. So I hope that also provides some reassurance that we've looked further across the projects to deal with that. On the second finding, it's great to see that the audit report was supportive of the fact that all of the lessons learned from the 2016 festival were uptaken and implemented towards the 2018 festival. However, the methods for doing that existed in a number of places. So the relationship, it's a grant monitoring relationship that the culture team has with the deliverers of the festival, Artichoke. And then the events team here at the GLA also have a relationship where they monitor how the operations are being supported, which happens through the lots of meetings. So we had kind of 2 groups which were successfully monitoring those activities. The recommendation was actually, from the GLA's perspective, a singular plan could be put together which had clear assigned ownerships. The audit did find that there were clear next steps with assigned ownerships across the board, but actually putting them together in a singular place was the recommendation which we accept and would absolutely take forward.
I do. Omkar, do you have any questions?
Yes, I was looking at 3.9, that in 2018 we attracted 1.4 million visitors, and in 2016 we did 1.2 million, which is very good. But of course the visitor spend went down.
It did, yes.
Was there any analysis on why that would have happened, or what does that say?
Not at the moment. I mean, for the investment that the Mayor has made of £500,000, the visitor spend of 20 million, and in fact an economic impact of just under 6 million, I think reflects very positively. We also had lots of repeat engagement, so one of the key concerns coming out of the 2016 festival was how to make the traffic around the event work well and to maintain safety across that, and all of that was very successfully implemented in spreading the festival out in 2018, so it had a fantastic, excellent safety record from that action. So I couldn't speculate about whether the way that the planning was extended and amended would have affected that. It may also be useful for Artichoke and for the GLA to look at the kind of profile of visitors, if it's possible to delve into that further. Actually, if we're reaching more diverse audiences, would that affect the spend that is happening within that? So I think we're really encouraged to see that the overall economic impact didn't fall very much short of that. We still increased footfall to the area by 20%, so it was very successful from that perspective.
Thank you.
You're happy with that? Yeah. I have no questions. Thank you very much, actually, for coming and answering. And I suppose you're free to go, actually.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Lucky you, eh? But no, thank you very much for coming. Next of the reports, actually, in fact, can we sort of change, because I noticed that Charmaine she's up for 2. So would you mind, actually, Debbie, if we did yours actually now, which is a review of London and Partners Governance Framework. Could you introduce that to us?
Yes.
Is another adequate?
This received, an adequate opinion for the review of London Partners. We're looking at page 57 of this. So London Partners are the Mayor's official promotional agency. So what we were looking at were the areas of the economic development strategy, the signed grant agreement, which we found ought to be in place, the funding and resources appropriately approved. However, we did identify 4 areas which are included in the recommendations on page, starting at page 10. So some of this was looking at the accountabilities, roles and responsibilities, spot checks. We were looking at to be introduced to review London Partners records, and this is very much looking at the income and expenditure documents, and also the consideration of introducing quarterly spot checks on the agreements that have been established with London Partners. So it's very much the governance applied to by the GLA on London Partners. And the final one was actually a terms of reference to be established for meetings showing the purpose of membership, etc. So again, this is another really sort of good governance recommendation. But overall, as I say, it received an adequate rating and was, I think it's fair to say, a quite well-run organisation on behalf, from the GLA perspective. But I shall allow Debbie to expand on that.
Debbie, can you sort of speak to those 4 areas for us?
Yeah, sure. Just before I do, by way of context, I mean, I welcome the audit, for the committee's panel's information that in terms of our own organisation, so I've recently taken on responsibility for economic development, including the GLA's responsibilities to LMP. So this is really helpful for me in terms of thinking about how we take LMP forward in terms of our clienting of it. So it now sits within my team, but that is a relatively new thing to me. But all of the recommendations are accepted. Just to go through them one by one briefly. So the first one is around the roles and responsibilities of the GLA team and making sure that that's written down. I think what the audit finds is there's clarity on the LMP side, and we need to match that with clarity written down so that everybody understands about the roles and responsibilities of my team in respect of our clienting of LMP. So that's accepted, and that's something that we'll implement. The next couple of recommendations are around spot checks. So we pay LMP on a quarterly basis in advance, and the recommendations relate to spot checks in order to validate those claims retrospectively, so we will introduce those. And the second spot check recommendation relates to the fact that we are a part funder, albeit majority funder, of we're the single largest funder of LMP, but they enter into sponsorship arrangements with a range of other partners. LMP have just agreed a new 3-year strategy, and part of that 3-year strategy is a more targeted approach to those sponsorship arrangements to make sure there's alignment with the strategy of LMP. The recommendation relates to spot checks on those partnerships to make sure that they're aligned with the aims and objectives of the Mayor, and that we're not exposed to any risks by being associated with those partnerships. So that's also accepted. We will implement those spot checks. And then the last one is around terms of reference for some of our meetings with LMP, which is relatively straightforward, and we're happy to implement as well.
Sorry, and these terms of reference and minutes will be all in public domain?
I think the officer level meetings and with LMP, I don't envisage that they would be published as such. Of course, things are subject to FOI, but I don't anticipate that the officer level meetings would be published. I'm going to look to Karen slightly in terms of the board meeting minutes. Are they published?
Yeah, I think they're all on LMP's website.
Yeah. So at that formal...
This is one area where the Assembly has a lot of concerns about the transparency of London Partners, right? And I can understand why we should have good audits and scrutiny of this body, particularly. But I also want to consider how much of this will be in the public domain, so that we can scrutinise properly what's happening.
This particular recommendation relates to what I would describe in layman's terms as very officer level meetings. And in fact, minutes, actual formal minutes, almost feels like overkill. It's more a question of having a record of actions, what we've agreed. My understanding of these...
For the purpose of who?
For the purposes of L&P and the officers in terms of our day-to-day relationship with each other.
And do the internal auditors have a look at it too?
The minutes from meetings?
Yes.
Yes, I had all access to it, yes.
That was
Everything
seen
was
as part of
provided
the
to
review.
me, yeah. Yeah.
Good.
But the board level and the transparency of the board, I completely agree. It's really important that there is transparency, and that's reflected through the website, and that's
all out
there.
yeah.
Okay.
There's no problem with that.
To be seen.
And they're published soon afterwards, or so suppose there's been a board meeting, okay, and how soon afterwards are they
A
published?
list of them all on the website, so yeah, they're all on.
They're all up to date, yeah, and published as soon after.
Yeah, the question is, how soon are they published afterwards? I just want to get this on the record, okay? How soon after the board meetings do the minutes go on the website?
I can tell you.
Is it a month?
We'd
Is
have
it
to
2
look back
weeks?
at that, yeah.
We can get back to you on
I
that.
can certainly get back to you.
Because
on
I think
that.
there is a need for that, okay? That we have,
Yeah.
if the minutes are up on public domain well enough to be scrutinized for people who want to look into those things, and the minutes are up in a time frame, okay, rather than 2 months or 3 months, when by the time we're out of date, they should be within 2 weeks, right? I think it's a fair thing to say.
At the very most within 2 weeks, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we'll check that out and we'll come back
Thank
to
you.
you.
I mean, as part of the review, we identified that they were published, but yes, that's the time frame. We need to go back and look at our testing to give you that answer, yeah.
Thank you.
This is really important. I would re-emphasise that, but Assembly Member Sahota brings up the importance of transparency, which is something going through all of our discussions and everything at the moment. So thank you for that. Great, I think that's it. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Glenn. You didn't have any more points?
No.
No, okay, cool. Okay, well, next we've got two actually that relate to Charmaine here, David. First of all, we're talking about the review of learning needs and delivery. If you could just say a few words of introduction. That was
yes,
a substantial rating.
This received, as you've noted, a substantial rating. However, we did identify two findings and recommendations within that. So what we're looking at is sort of a process on the full metadata being recorded on policies, so it details the policy owner, the date of approval. So again, a very much a process-driven recommendation. And the second one was looking at the feedback and standardisation of feedback forms. So again, that's a good approach to obviously have in place, and that they use consistently on all courses that are run. So it is again getting consistent information to ensure that the benefit received of the courses being undertaken is monitored, and you can obviously compare like with like. So that's a simple standardisation of the forms there. But as I say, it received a substantial opinion, and Charmaine can obviously answer any further questions.
Anything you'd like to add,
No, I'd probably like to just highlight a couple of things that are evolving in terms of L&D identification. So, on the back of some of these findings, and to refine the process, we're also this year going to look at strategic learning needs. So we will make sure that we engage not just with staff, as we set out here that we've done in the past, but also with senior managers, with executive directors, to capture the sort of forward look of learning at a high level to inform the portfolio of learning that we provide for the year ahead. So, for example, we know we've got already emerging learning needs around GDPR, some learning needs around managing capital programme budgets. So this may not come through performance reviews, as we've seen in the past, but will come from a top-down approach. And I think we need both. So the latter is something that I've just introduced in the last quarter, as I've only been here since September. So it will build on what we've got here and enhance it, I hope, going forward.
I have no question.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We note that report. And the second one, which relates to you as well, Charmaine, substantial. I Trent Post implementation review, David.
Yeah,
Can you just say a few words?
certainly can, Chair. Again, as you've noted, it's received a substantial review. Maybe to give a bit of context, this is something, a review that we've that's been put back a couple of times in the audit plan over the last couple of years. So the actual system was implemented in June 2015. As with any sort of major system change, it's good sort of governance to have a good project governance in particular, to have a post-implementation review, to obviously have any learning that would have occurred during that project that you can take forward to future projects. And as part of that, we got in our systems RSM, who do a lot of our IT work to undertake this review for us, and Karen assisted with that. And yes, as I say, it received a good rating, and then hopefully what we discovered from that there was good learning that, you know, for future projects, certainly of this type, can be taken forward. So all in all, it was a well implemented project. I know there may be some points about whether the system is good, but that wasn't what we're looking at the viability and maybe the usability, should I say, of the system. This is looking at how the system was, the project management behind the system implementation in itself.
Karen, if you assisted, would you like to add anything to that?
No, as I say, it's very, review came across as substantial. They didn't sort of recognise any risks or recommendations. So it's obviously, you know, followed the procedure and was put in very well.
I think I'd like to make 2 points actually. Firstly, that this is a good place to be, and actually because some time has elapsed, we actually are looking at for the year ahead about how we will upgrade the system, so this will be in good stead. And secondly, as David mentioned, I'm not sure why the audit had been put back some time, but we're very grateful for. I certainly wanted to make sure it was done in this year or the previous financial year. So thank you to David and Karen, who had to condense a number of audits into a short space of time for us to catch up, which we've done. So we have now done our full programme of audits for 17-18, which was important.
No, I'm fine. Yeah.
I would like to sort of add to that, actually, that was a really good thing, actually, that Charmaine did push for this to be put in place rather than looking at putting it back. So that's always a positive.
Yeah. Great.
I don't think, Chairman, we've ever had someone with 2 substantials in one meeting before, so I just huge jealousy and envy. I should congratulate Charmaine. I think we should maybe record that as well.
Well, I think audit are your friends, and you keep them close.
Done that very well.
Genuinely, the professional, and particularly the professional expertise that David and Karen brought in for the iTrent audit, which was somebody from outside of the audit team, but who has experience of implementation of IT projects, really engaged well with the GLA officers, and I think there was probably some unease in that the audit was being done now nearly 3 years after implementation, which of course makes people nervous because it's not fresh in their minds, but actually a good rating and a lesson to them all that they should, we should do this in a timely way.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks. Yep, that's generous. Thank you very much indeed, Charmaine, for that. Thank you. So, we move on to the next one here, which is the follow-up review of GLA oversight and governance. I think. Oh no, I'm very sorry. I'm skipping myself. I'm jumping the shark. What is jumping the shark in audit terms? Going over that's right. And it's a review of the Linux Ubuntu security and governance control framework. I think again, David, isn't that one of your to introduce to us?
Yes, certainly. Okay, this was a review, obviously, of the Linux and Ubuntu security and governance control framework. It received a substantial framework. We again pulled in our co-source RSM, who have the expertise in IT audit, to undertake this, which they duly did. Again, with Karen overseeing that review. There were a couple of, well, in fact there were 3 recommendations, should I say, that I'm sure David can speak to, but those 3, we were looking at a password policy for the OSS, should be enhanced, set out stronger logical access controls. David, obviously you can see the management response there regarding the engineers. The second recommendation was to carry out an internal vulnerability assessment using appropriate penetration test methodology, which again is a standard approach to security of IT systems. And the third one was the GLA to review the opportunity to decommission, and this is out of support Linux systems, which I'm sure David can talk to probably better than I can.
Shall I start with just explaining what Ubuntu is?
Yes.
Is that
Thank God I'm not the only one.
No. This is a whole different language.
Yeah, so Ubuntu is an open source operating system, and the GLA, one of the things I think that the GLA should be proud of is that we've led on open source, community developed free software, which makes up the backbone of many of our systems here. I think we've been putting in open source software here for over 10 years, and as a result of that, I think it's worth bearing in mind that's probably saved the GLA millions of pounds in license costs and stuff like that. Now, what we use Ubuntu for is the operating system for a lot of our web-based solutions. So internally, that will be things like Connect, the intranet, and the write-on system, the system that's used for dealing with mail or correspondence. But also externally, it runs things like our external websites and our external facing systems, like the London Development Database and stuff like that will all be operating using that. So it sort of underpins a number of the systems that the GLA runs. And we've accepted the recommendations that have come in. I mean, I think just to go through the three of them. The first one is about the password. I mean, it's true that what we're doing at the moment is we're using sort of like the recommended standard approach that Ubuntu comes with. I think the feedback we've had is that, well, actually, perhaps we should be aiming for higher than that, and we're making those changes and we're putting that in place. The vulnerability assessment, it's absolutely true that we take security of these systems very seriously, but I think our approach has been very much about externally, if people try to hack into our systems from outside. We have 6 monthly penetration testing, which is put in place to try and prevent anybody trying to do this sort of stuff. But one of the things that I think was pointed out as part of this audit was that what we haven't been doing is doing things where somebody may come into the GLA, plug in a device onto our internal network. Now, we've got other layers of security around that, but I think that's a reasonable thing, and we'll put that in place and we'll make that happen.
Sorry, but before you go, under what circumstances would that happen? I mean, you just mentioned someone coming in just to... I know you're being flippant, but I mean, under what kind of circumstances?
Well, I suppose an opportunity could be that if you take somebody on as a contractor or whatever, give them access to our systems, then potentially they've got access to the network. Now, they won't have access to the Ubuntu operating system because obviously we've got passwords and accounts and layers of security that prevent people getting access to areas that they shouldn't be entitled to. I suppose the point that they're making here, though, is that if somebody comes in and is given a GLA account and actually has got a background in technology or whatever, then it might be possible for them to find a way through that. And that is an area where we haven't put in place the degree of security testing that perhaps we should have done. So we've taken that on board and we'll make that happen. And the last point just relates to the use of getting rid of systems which are running on out-of-date operating systems. I think the one they're probably talking about there is the write-on system, which has been used for quite a few years and is currently going through a project which is replacing that system, which should mean that system will be going probably at some point next year. So I think our thinking on that is that we're not going to do a lot of work upgrading that, I think, at this stage, if it's going to be replaced next year. But what we are going to do is have a look at systems which aren't due for replacement, that are running on older versions of Ubuntu, and make sure that they're up to date.
I see. But nevertheless, you had a substantial rating. Do you have any questions?
I don't know.
Thank you very much for that explanation too, actually.
I think it was adequate.
No, it's substantial.
I find it substantial, Tom.
Sorry, no, he said it was sucky at the... Have we got that one?
Yeah, I think there's an error in the over.
I wouldn't get that kind of thing wrong.
It's in my name, so...
It is in your name.
So we give you an adequate job.
I'll give me less than adequate.
Yeah.
They're in black and white.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep to my perfect record. To say.
Thank you, David.
I do apologise.
Thank you. Right, we're now to Tim, aren't we, actually? And the next one is a follow-up review of the GLA Oversight of Governance of London Legacy Development, LLDC, of course. Tim, could you say a few words, say a few words on that? That received an adequate.
It did. So this one is inadequate. I think the report notes that the arrangements have improved since the initial review, and I'm sure my audit friends would say it must have been very close to being a substantial. There you go, very close. So if you look at the recommendations, they have all either been implemented or part implemented, but there are a few where there's a little bit more to do. So taking the first one, we did think that we might implement what is a standalone document called the LLDC Governance Direction into the GLA's own scheme of delegation, but I think on reflection that might actually be a bit cumbersome and make that document too long, so we decided a slightly different route, which was that we've published those two documents on the internet together, and we've cross-linked from one to the other, so a member of the public or anyone else can easily jump from one to the other. And then on the next one, there was a recommendation to develop some terms of reference. They have been written, they're in draft. The chair of the liaison group that these terms of reference relate to has said he's content with them and they just need to be rubber stamped at the next meeting, which is coming up shortly. The next recommendation was about capturing discussions from various separate conversations in the minutes of the liaison group, and that's been implemented. The next recommendation was about the independent assurance review of the London Stadium. I think there are two things there. One, that didn't raise any issues that directly relate to this area, so the GLA's oversight of LLDC wasn't something that came up in that report, and had it been, we would have actioned that as necessary. It is about the long-term sustainability of the London Stadium, which is a very complicated and difficult issue that Carl referred to earlier. So that is being worked through, but it's not something that can be done on a short time scale. And then the next recommendation was about resources for oversight of LLDC, and that's been implemented. And then the final recommendation is in hand. It's about including some additional information in LLDC financial and performance reports, and that will be actioned for Q1, so within the next few weeks.
Do you have any? No, nothing? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Note that report. Must do better.
Very close to substantial.
I think the auditors are particularly harsh on us because we're held to a higher standard, Peter.
Next we have basically follow-up review of planning advice service income health check. David, actually, could you again just introduce before we ask?
Yes, this in the original review which we undertook in June 2017, we identified 3 recommendations. Was it 2 or 4? 4. It was 4. Sorry, looking over, can't count.
3.
It's 3.
Implemented when it's outstanding.
Yes. So there's one from the 3 recommendations. From the 4 recommendations. 3 have been fully implemented, and there is still 1 outstanding where the original rec applies. However, the target date, I'm sure Juliana will talk to this, is to be completed by the 1st of August. So on that basis, we've been able to give this a substantial opinion and rating.
Would you like to add something?
I think I'll just talk to the point where we're actually doing further work with Karen. Actually, I do want to thank Karen. She's been absolutely marvellous through all of this.
Thank you.
So great thanks from us. It's really to help us. I suppose the problem we have with the system is it's not very set up for us to be responsive in the way that the mayor or the deputy mayors expect us. And if we're generating income and we're charging for meetings to try and make sure that things are done as rapidly as we need to and have all the paperwork. So that's our excuse for why the paperwork wasn't as up to date as it is. We've got measures in place now. Hopefully that all falls away when our new planning change manager implements us moving to online payments by September. So this should be...
It's a big thing, isn't it?
It is a big thing. It allows us to have payments pretty much immediately and then us have meetings within 48 hours. And sometimes it has to be that rapid if we have to resolve planning issues that the mayor expects us to deal with quickly. So having cumbersome paperwork can be difficult if you're expected to be income generating and responsive. So, thanks again to Tom's team and to Martin and actually all of our finance colleagues who've really helped us move rapidly this year towards getting us onto an online payment system. So it's, we're pretty pleased with where we're moving to. It will remove a lot of repetitive work, it will automate a lot, so human error falls away. So we're pretty pleased with where we're moving to.
Karen, you've particularly been working with Juliana.
And Peter. Yes.
Right, okay. Yeah. So great. Well, that's thank you very much. It's lovely. Thank you. We'll note that and excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now we're moving on to the internal audit annual report for 2017-18, and either David or Karen, could you
well, this is the breakdown of work undertaken by internal audit for the year 2017-18. Probably draw your attention to pages 116 and 117, which is a breakdown of the work undertaken. As you can see from the table at the top, it also gives a percentage breakdown of the opinion rating that each report, or those reports that we've reviewed during the year, have obtained. And below that, then it goes into the ratings of these specific reports. And from that basis, this means that we believe from our work, or our opinion from the work undertaken is that the GLA has an adequate and effective control environment to meet and achieve its objectives. Willing to take any questions on that, but that's a very, very quick summary of that. But as you can see, the report gives a breakdown of all our work and time spent during the year.
Thank you. I'm just interested, the fourth plinth programme got an adequate. Can you, what were the things that would have stopped it being rated a bit higher than that? This is just one of those projects of great public interest, that's it.
Yes. I would have to be honest, I'd have to look back at that particular review and to see that. However, what we'd be looking at is looking at the scope of the audit and the objectives of the audit to see how those are being met. I would expect the fourth plinth, we just due to do the
Yeah, we're due to do the follow-up in the next couple of months now.
We did have them in, didn't we? We had someone from the culture team a while
That's
ago,
right,
about 3 or 4 meetings ago.
So when we come, as Karen's just mentioned, and when we come to do the follow-up, we would expect those recommendations that we made as part of that review to be implemented, and then that would be we would be looking at giving that a substantial opinion from that. Often, from the first time reviews, you would be looking at hopefully at least an adequate. Very rarely a poor one, but from that from the follow-ups, then we're looking at really to be, with the implementation of recommendations, to either achieve the adequate gain, but more importantly to looking at substantial.
I seem to remember when we had the member of the culture team, I'm afraid I can't remember her name, but it came down to something about artistic temperaments not allowing so much for organisational detail. I'm being as vague as but I do remember it was something about that we had to be a little bit more rigorous about.
Was it Jackie McNerney? Was it?
Sorry?
Was it Jackie McNerney?
That's, I think so.
Yeah.
But it was something to do with basically giving more, as much rigor to that area and not allowing
Was it the returns from the organisations?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
That's coming back to me now.
Well,
so when we come to do the follow-up review, then we'll be looking at that, and that'll come back to you in I think it's October. We're undertaking.
Okay, thank you, David. So can we note that one? Assemblyman Sohoda doesn't have anything. Next, we have the independent report of factual findings and costs claimed under FCH JU grant agreement financed under the FP7. David or Karen, which would?
Well, I can briefly support them. These are requirement often by either the EU or central government for internal audit to look at the grant funding and how those that's been undertaken. As you can see from this, the work undertaken, the first one was by Karen, who, if you've got any specific questions, I'm sure we'll be able to answer, on the High Five, which was a European £31 million project, which was led by the GLA's hydrogen team, and that was part funded by the Brussels-based Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, which is where the FCHJU acronym arrives. And we were one of 15 partners delivering 185 fuel cell electric vehicles. So this was very much looking at how that grant was being spent, across the GLA, wasn't it? So this is very much an accounting sort of process that we are required to undertake on behalf of the European Union.
Thank you. And finally, we have the. Nothing from you.
No.
Finally, we have the GLA Internal Audit Progress Report. David?
This is, I've just spoken about the annual report. Obviously, this is looking at the first quarter's work, very much the reviews that we've already spoken to in the previous audits. And it also touches on the number of days and the counter forward work that's been completed in quarter one as well. So this is very much an update on the work undertaken. As you can see in 4.1, that work covers 56 days of the audit programme. However, we expect that to meet the 444 days within the audit plan for this coming year. So it's first quarter work really, so probably doesn't really tell you much, the 56 days, maybe quarter 2 and 3 will tell you more whether we're on schedule or not.
Thank you very much. Yes.
I'd love to ask.
Yeah. Nothing? Yeah. Can we note those reports then? That's great. Thank you very much, David. Thanks. We could move on therefore to item 10, which is the annual governance statement. Do members have any comments on this? No? No? I think we can note that. Please. Thank you very much. Item 11, monitoring of expenses and taxable benefits. Tom, can you introduce, give us a few words on it?
Absolutely. So this is the report you get every meeting, setting out the expenses claimed by the Mayor Assembly members and senior members of staff. There was one particular point, Chair, that we wanted to bring to your attention for the purposes of comparison of costs between years. The Mayor's recent trip to India and Pakistan is one amount outstanding where we're relying on a third party to itemise the services they provided, and that's not yet been resolved. So in terms of the full accounting for that trip, that can't happen yet because we're waiting on that one amount. So
it's just a matter of waiting, is it? That's all.
Yeah,
it's
so
nothing contentious.
Well, I think the people who went from the international team with the Mayor need to go through it line by line. So yes, we did receive that service. We did receive that service. We did receive that service. So that is that is happening.
Do you know what? What kind of time we're talking about?
Well, it should. I mean, it should be resolved. Very shortly. I mean, because I think as you said to me before the meeting, that the trip itself was some months ago, wasn't it? So that should be resolved shortly. So I'd be hoping it would be resolved this month. In terms of the rest of the report, I think there's nothing else I particularly. We have the normal exceptional reporting on pages 185 and 186, but there's nothing else I would particularly to bring to your attention, Chair.
Yeah, I was interested that the Deputy Mayor for Culture and Creative Industries had 7,300, which is an outlier from the other deputy mayors. Was this? I mean, do we know whether any overseas trips or what?
I do know that she's been on some overseas trips, because I'm pretty sure she went to, there's an international cultural... She chairs it. I think they met in South Korea and they met somewhere else as well, didn't they? As Mark just told me,
it says 7,336. And of course, the Deputy Mayor for Housing had 2,324, and the Deputy Mayor for Social Integration, Social Mobility and Community Engagement was 1,500. Yeah. But I mean, this was way out.
Yeah, so I think from memory that amount, we can, if you'd like to, we can definitely get back with in writing with a more detailed answer. From memory, that includes one long haul flight, and under our rules, as you will know, over a certain length of time, I think 12 hours, which it was, then you can claim a business class flight. So I think that's
business class, really.
So that was that.
So the personnel do fly business class, do they?
Well, provided it's over a certain number of hours, which I think is 12 according to expenses and benefits framework.
I remember 9 or 12. 9
or 12. We can give you the proper answer on that as well. But that's on the website. There's no mystery about that.
Well, no.
That was
just asking purely as a point of information.
But what Justine claimed was entirely proper. I can certainly say that.
Yeah.
I do remember that. Yeah.
We're over a long period, over a certain time flight.
Yeah.
It's long, business class. I see.
For long.
Or maybe there's a need, right, for somewhere to be shown, right, why this is so. I mean, like I've asked for an explanation. There could be other members of the public looking at these things.
Yeah.
Who could be asking for explanation, say, well, why is this an outlier?
Well, that's why we're here, to answer your question. So if a member of the public's always on the website, we sometimes get correspondence in, we reply. So there's no...
So maybe if you can write to the chair.
Yeah, we'll happily write to the chair. We'll give you the number of hours, and we'll also this. From memory, I think it was South Korea, but I can get back to you on that.
So some kind of cultural conference of like people who organise festivals and such like.
There's a huge international cultural convention between a forum between cities, and I think they met in San Francisco recently as well, I think. But anyway.
6 hours business class.
6 hours, there we go. So it's basically beyond Europe. I think it's basically worked out, so you're going beyond Europe. So Tim's telling me it's 6 hours plus to get a business class flight. So you have to go beyond Europe, essentially, for that to trigger.
I'm sort of sceptical. I don't know about you. I'm kind of sort of sceptical about the usefulness of these trips. I mean, I'm just putting something out there. And it's interesting that the culture deputy is the one who has the big trip. I don't know, but anyway.
I mean, I think.
If you're going, if we've got a knife crime problem.
Yeah.
I can understand someone going off to like New York to look at how they've dealt with it. Do you know what I mean? But this is probably beyond my remit to say this is totally unnecessary.
But I mean, I think one thing to say is that there's kind of two routes that these things crop up. One is where the GLA pays and you see it here. The other route is where people declare trips under gifts and hospitality, because often conference organisers are happy to pay for people to go there. So often people might go abroad without a direct cost to the GLA. It's still traceable under the gifts and hospitality, but it's not under this. On your policy point, that's not for me to answer.
No, it's not for any of us to answer. Purely an idle observation on my part. Just having had a life in culture before I came here, there are a hell of a lot of these things that go on that you can go on all around the world to, do you know what I mean?
I think it has been known for finance people to spend their time travelling around the world, but unfortunately Martin and I don't. But that's, some of our predecessors in GLA group bodies did a bit of that, but unfortunately we haven't. But there you go.
If you've got anything more.
No,
Thank you.
I shall write to you,
Thank you
Chair,
very
on the
much.
grounds set out.
Thank you. Well, in that case, we just have the date of the next meeting, which is scheduled for the 16th of October, 2018. Any other business? All I would suggest is just please do have a very nice rest of the summer. And thank you very much for coming in.
We hope your shoulder improves, whatever it is.
Well, I hope so too. It's ruining the whole summer. But anyway, cheers.
Yes, there's a doctor sat next to you.
Actually, that's true. Free advice. Wow.
GLA, Committee Room 5, Sound. 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 GLA, Chamber, 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 sound. GLA, Chamber,